Peugeot. It has a long history of making performance cars which are fun and fast, but don't cost the earth to buy nor run. In fact, the legendary 205 GTI is considered by many as the best all-round hot hatch ever created. This is the new 208 GTI, and Peugeot promises it will live up to the legend. It certainly looks the part. Not only is it lower, wider and a whole lot meaner than the normal 208, it also features some classic GTI design cues both outside and in. The new 208 GTI doesn't arrive in the UK until April, so we visited France for an exclusive passenger ride with the man responsible for how it drives.
A very important point concerning the difference between the 208 GTI and the normal version of the 208 is the engine. This engine is well known, 200 horsepower at 5,800 RPM. Also big torque with 275 Newton meters. And it's clearly a very good engine and very good performance in the B range on this kind of small hatchback.
Peugeot says the 208 GTI will do 0 to 62 miles an hour in just 6.8 seconds, while top speed is 143 miles an hour. And those stats are pretty impressive, though it appears the car can also turn heads even when it's going slowly. However, what does it feel like from the passenger seat?
Well, they're calling this the grown-up GTI, and it's easy to see why. Even though it's lost 110 kilos from the 207 GTI, it felt really luxurious inside. You've got leather sports seats, a nice leather steering wheel, some really nice red highlights along the dash and the dials. While Gizam was taking us round, it felt very, very flat when cornering and seemed like there was more front end than the standard car. But on the move, it felt a bit like a DS3, one of the sportier versions. So the suspension, although firmer than the standard car, was really supple on longer undulations and then didn't feel too firm. So it is a car you could use every day.
That was also the thing with the old GTI. It was a car that was sporty enough to be great fun when you were in the mood, but not so sporty that it was a pain to drive when you weren't. Thing is though, do we all look back on this car with rose-tinted spectacles? Is it really the best performance Peugeot ever? To find out, we put it head-to-head with two other contenders for that title, the 106 Rally and the 306 Rally. The 205 GTI was released in 1984 with a 1.6 litre 16-valve engine that produced 115 brake horsepower. In 1986, this 1.9 litre version with 130 brake horsepower was added to the range for £9,995. Weighing in at only 875 kilograms, it had an impressive power-to-weight ratio and was capable of 0 to 60 in 7.8 seconds and a top speed of 123 miles an hour. But how does the car feel to drive today?
I'm now probably sitting in the best car Peugeot has ever made, the 205 GTI. It's a 1.9, it's done about 38,000 miles, but it feels tight as a drum, to be honest. It's still got some old quirks, but you can see why everyone harps on about them so much. The steering is pin sharp, the clutch and the gearbox is really light but really easy to use. It's 5-speed. You're just so much more in contact with the driving experience than you are with a modern hot hatch. And yeah, I think it's love already, to be honest.
The 205 GTI ceased production in 1995, and with the 206 GTI not arriving until 2003, it meant it was up to the 106 to fill the small performance car gap in Peugeot's range. And for raw, hot hatch thrills, this Spartan Series 2 106 Rally was tough to beat. Introduced in 1997, it cost £9,895 and came with a 1.6 litre engine with 103 brake horsepower. 0 to 60 took 8.5 seconds and top speed was 121 miles an hour.
Okay, here we are now in the 106 Rally. The 106 came with a 1.6 litre engine, and although it was a little cranky earlier on when it was cold, once it's warmed up, the mid-range is surprisingly punchy. All the controls are really, really tiny. In fact, I feel like I've grown larger. The throttle particularly is just this narrow little sliver of metal, but push it to the floor and you can still have plenty of thrills. The 106 wasn't quite as loose at the back end as the 205 and wasn't as fast either, but corners are really flat and well actually. The steering's really responsive and You can feel the car talking to you all the time.
For those after something a bit faster than the 106 Rally, there was its bigger brother, the 306 Rally. It arrived in 1997 for £15,995 and used the same 2-litre 16-valve engine with 167 brake horsepower and 6-speed transmission as the GTI 6. However, all non-essentials were removed, saving 52 kilograms from the car's weight and cutting the 0 to 60 sprint by 1.7 seconds to 6.8 seconds.
Rounding off our top 3 is the 306 Rally. Now this has actually got the biggest engine here. It's 2-litre, putting about 167 brake horsepower on the road. It's got a 6-speed gearbox and it feels the most modern inside as well. The cabin's got some recognisable modern Peugeot switchgear and you sit a little bit higher than you do in the 106. Feels like an entertaining little hot hatch, but for me, despite the extra power, it sort of lacks the character of the 205, and similarly there's not much flair in this cabin. Although the seats are really supportive, it just doesn't feel quite as special as the 205 or as fun as the 106.
The new 208 GTI clearly has some illustrious predecessors to live up to, but which of them sets the benchmark it has to beat?
Well, we've driven all 3 of our greatest fast Peugeots now, and although they're all of a similar vintage, they're actually quite different in character. The 106, that feels a bit like an original Mini. You sit very low to the road, and all the controls are really tiny, but the engine's surprisingly eager, and it's pretty punchy in the mid-range for such a small car. The 205, well, that's a legend for a reason. This 1.9 is probably one of the sweetest examples I've driven, and the engine comes on song really, really fast, but it's still very light and nimble. It's the blueprint for all modern hot hatches. As for the 306, well, that's probably the fastest car here. It's got nearly 170 brake horsepower, and it'll probably give a few modern hot hatches a run for their money. Of the 3 of them, my favourite's probably the 205 GTI, and that's why it's our #1 fast Peugeot.